Assalamu alaikum, this is Usama Khilji. I'm your new host for DigiPod, which is a podcast on digital rights and all things internet on DawnNews. So you can catch our episode every Wednesday at 8 p.m. on DawnNews English YouTube and at 11 p.m. on DawnNews on your TV screens. I'm a digital rights expert, so we will be talking a lot about digital rights issues and the intersection of technology with human rights, with politics, and society. And as you know, internet and technology are no longer a separate issue. They're interlinked with our everyday life, be it society, be it politics, be it media, be it human rights, or be it very essential things like education and healthcare. So we'll be unpacking all of how this works and how it impacts society, and very importantly, learn from experts what can we do about this. So today we have with us Mahsa Alimardani, who's an Iranian digital rights expert based in the United Kingdom. She works with Witness, which is an organization that documents and archives movements, but specifically looks at the technological side of how this works out. So our episode today deals with the cost of internet shutdowns. What really happens behind the scene when we go offline, when governments forcibly shut down the internet, and then we'll also talk to her about what is it really that we can do to understand internet shutdowns and their impact, and then how can we all work together across regions, across continents, to combat the impacts of internet shutdowns and come together for advocacy, for research, but very importantly, how to circumvent this blackout of communication, which is essential to society today. So today we're joined by Mahsa Alimardani, who's an Iranian activist who focuses on digital rights and the tech side of what is all that is happening in Iran. And she also works as Associate Director of Technology at Witness, which is an organization that archives, digital archives of different conflicts and issues related to digital rights. So a very warm welcome to you, Mahsa, and thank you so much for joining us today. Today's episode, as you know, is called The Cost of Going Offline. And what we're really focusing on here is that what really happens when governments shut down networks, shut down the internet, or slow the internet down. And as Mahsa, you've been following all that has been happening in Iran, especially with the government enforcing internet shutdowns during protests. So it would be great if you can give us a bit of context of what really is happening in Iran today.
Yeah, Osama. It's really interesting. When I first started working on human rights, it's now been close to 15 years of me being in the human rights field. And most of that time I've spent on tech. But what initially drew me to this was the fact that I was in Iran in 2009 during the Green Movement. I was at the very beginning of my, undergraduate education, and it really reoriented what I wanted to study and what I wanted my career to be focused on because I watched a movement of millions of Iranians on the street demanding their rights, demanding their right to elect their own government. And so I've spent a lot of my time working on social movements, but also trying to see the what kind of repression social movements have faced. And one of the earliest kind of professional things I worked on was a Truth and Justice Commission for the massacres that happened at the very beginning of the Iranian Revolution in 1988. Um, I'm not sure if you or maybe your audience knows about this, but when the 1979 Islamic Revolution happened in Iran, it was a coalition of different groups that wanted to overthrow the Shah because they imagined a democratic and more just and equal Iran. And that coalition were included, seculars, leftists, various different kinds of political leanings, as well as the Islamists. And it coalesced around the leadership of Khomeini, who made a lot of promises for all of these coalitions to work together. Fast forward to today, 2026. What we're seeing is evidence of possibly the largest scale violent crackdown in documented history. The numbers are staggering, and this all happened under the blanket of a 2-week internet shutdown. It's not the first time that the regime has shut down the internet in order to commit such atrocities. In 2019, they shut down the internet for a week. It's estimated that during that week-long shutdown, they massacred 1,500 protesters. This time, they have exceeded their own record in both the length of the shutdown and in both the number of people massacred. And the numbers are truly staggering.
So, in terms of the scale of the protest, it sounds like a very, very big movement.
Very big movement, cuts across many different socioeconomic backgrounds. Of course, this started in the bazaars in Tehran and in other cities because of the currency drop. Of course, this isn't just an economic grievance. The spark was the economy, but it is very much a fact that people are tired of this regime mismanaging the government, the regime's corruption, their inability to manage anything basic, water infrastructure. Tehran has been running out of water for the past year. These are just basic things you expect from your government to be able to do that this regime hasn't been because they've been riddled in so much corruption.
You framed it very well where you informed us of how the internet shutdown is central to the ability to repress or suppress the populace. So if we could please get into the technical side of the shutdown, what are the technical methods that the regime is using in Iran to shut down the internet? So are they throttling the internet? Are they blocking platforms? Are they cutting mobile data? Or are these directives sent to internet service providers? How exactly is this being operationalized?
So that's a really interesting question. News has come out that one of the directors of one of the largest kind of ISPs in Iran was recently fired because he took longer than an hour to implement the directive to shut down. So on January 8th, which was the evening that the former crown prince had asked all of Iran to have the uprising for everyone to come out on the evening of January 8th, Thursday, January 8th, and there was a call by a lot of other Kurdish parties similarly to come out onto the streets. And so the regime planned to have the shutdown. One of the ISPs took longer than the others to implement their shutdown across their network. And so that's the head of that ISP has been fired and replaced by the regime because, of course, they control the ISP. So basically, the first internet shutdown happened in 2009 in Iran, which I referenced before, the Green Movement. And so I think this was one of the first global internet shutdowns that we saw. And it was at this point that the regime saw they were losing control. And it was only a few hours that in 2009 when this happened. And since 2009, the regime has spent hundreds of millions of dollars into creating a centralized internet governance and infrastructure system. And it's hundreds of millions of dollars the regime could have spent in building a better Iran. But of course, their investments have often been in building infrastructure and systems to repress their population as opposed to help their population. And so since 2009, there's been different bodies. They've really tried to centralize control of the internet to, individuals like the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei. They've tried to make the internet an issue of national security.
Mm.
Like there's foreign intervention and foreign influence coming through the internet from the US and Israel. Any sort of like freedom, any sort of activism or dissidence movement is often framed by the regime as some sort of foreign infiltration by enemies. Even when 100% these are authentic Iranian movements, they label them as Israeli or American CIA operations when you know this is just like authentic Iranian voices or authentic Iranian efforts. The internet has become a national security issue, and um, basically since 2017, on average, there have been two protests. Every 2 years, there has been a protest since 2017
Mm.
until now, and we've seen different forms of aggressive internet disruptions and internet controls. After 2017, we saw censorship of more sites. Most popular mainstream applications are blocked in Iran. And so Iranians are probably some of the most tech savvy people because they know how to use VPNs very well. They know how to like switch between them and figure out all of these different methods to play the cat and mouse game with the regime that is trying to block them from accessing things freely. So there's widespread censorship of popular applications and platforms, in which each movement there's been more added to it. Not until 2019 did we see just a complete shutdown of the internet. And in 2019, um, of course, there's a cost benefit analysis. The economy is very much dependent on the global internet, and the regime knows this. The regime itself has stakeholders that benefits from connection to the global internet. So in 2019, when the week-long shutdown happened, there's estimates that they had about $1.5 billion of damage to the Iranian economy because of
In
that
one
shutdown
week.
in that 1 week, yes. So of course, and since then, there's been, if like I followed internet policy, lots of debates of whether to completely nationalize the internet. So during that week-long shutdown, they tried to turn on just domestic connections. And so this has been a project they have also been building since 2009, even before 2009, to create just like a domestic internet, sort of like how North Korea has it. But the difference between Iran and North Korea is that North Koreans never were exposed to the global internet, so
Mm.
they never had that dependence or never had that tradition. In Iran, since the internet was introduced, there has been some integration, very high penetration into using the global internet. So Iranian society and economy has not been able to divest from the global internet for the regime to do what they want. And it's often been seen to be in their own economic interests to maintain those connections. However, what they've been trying to develop is more sophisticated and efficient ways of doing this. So fast forward to 2022, during the Women Life Freedom movement, we didn't see the shutdowns that we had seen before. I think the threat to the regime wasn't as strong. uh, 2022, the protest kind of went on from October 2022 to well into 2023. So it was a very spread out movement, without like necessarily one intense like night of uprising. And so we saw different methods back then. We saw things like mobile curfews. So
Mm.
at the times when people were on the streets, the mobile phones couldn't connect to the internet, or certain provinces. And they had months-long internet shutdowns in Sistan and Baluchistan because they were trying to settle down that province. So we had more regional shutdowns in 2022. With this time, the difference is that the fear that the regime had, the fact that there was this call, that so many
Mm.
people were ready to go out onto the streets, um, has meant that they thought it was like worth whatever damage they were going to do to themselves to shut down the internet. And on the evening of January 8th, we saw before the internet was shut down, the trickles of the videos were coming out, and in these real streets I knew myself from Tehran, filled to the brim with people, like crowds I had never seen come out
Mm.
onto the streets. So it was really incredible, and it was very obvious that this was a big threat, which is
Mm.
why
Mm.
it was cut off. And, up until right now, I think there's been some resumption of connectivity these past few days. I think there's about 30% connectivity across the Iranian network up until last night, which was Monday, January 26th. But yes, it's been the longest internet shutdown, and in some ways, it still continues to the time we're recording right now.
Masa, you spoke very well about the real world impact this has. You spoke about how in 1 week there was over $1.5 billion losses to the economy. So I'd like you to touch upon more of the impact that these shutdowns have, for example, on small businesses, on freelancers, on e-commerce, but also disruption to education, for example, or to healthcare, because presumably even in Iran, people are moving to telemedicine, they're moving to online, classes. So what is the overall impact, and also on the information ecosystem, right? So does the shutdown lead to more disinformation? Are we able to access information? So it'd be great to, hear more on your thoughts on the impact this has on society.
Yeah, these are really great questions. So the regime has really tried to create a domestic network to put a lot of these national services on those domestic networks. It's often quite glitchy because, trying to divest a domestic network from an
Mm-hmm.
international network isn't easy or straightforward, in terms of the technical infrastructure. And like in 2019, there was a lot of glitches in trying to turn domestic network on. And even and this time around, same sort of difficulties also were experienced. I think it took about 48 hours for some of these domestic services to turn on after the
Mm-hmm.
shutdown started. So there are these mechanisms. It's largely imperfect, but it has been able to continue. I mean, I know a lot of people were just doing their banking physically, going in person. Um, and I mean, the schools, you mentioned education, schools are some of the biggest points of sensitivity to them because the students are often at the forefront of protests. Like we've even seen like children, elementary school children, start protests. And so immediately the crackdowns happened on the universities, on the, university dormitories, and they turned it off, like, going back to the COVID era of we're going online, we're not going to have in person because in person means fear of mobilization, a fear of crowds getting together. So there has been that kind of sense of trying to calm the schools down and not allow people to come together and try to, make use of the domestic networks when they can. And it's interesting because in 2022, the internet for the universities was on a network that remained online. And this time around, we haven't seen the universities come online in the same way.
Mm.
Um, and I think your other question was, how have they come to this in terms of the sophistication of what they've built?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's clearly much more technically advanced this time around. We've seen a lot of also white SIM cards. So this is like people who are tied to the government, or have some sort of privileged connection where have had been granted white SIM cards to be able to freely access the internet. Some businesses that were closed or owned partly by regime individuals were given special internet access to remain like functional and in business. And it's become kind of a joke on Persian social media that the government has given access, in certain like government centers to people to come access international internet for 30 minutes. They have to like sign up, line up, and like be able to go and use it for 30 minutes. And it's a joke online of like, why would I do this? Why, like, what can I do in 30 minutes? I need continuous access to the internet, and like someone is sitting above me watching me like check my
Mm.
email or check my messages in these government approved centers. So that has been like one of their kind of remedies to help stop the damage that not accessing the global internet has had for Iranians. But of course, I mean, the one thing that has been a game changer has been satellite internet.
Mm.
And this is something the regime, and like you ask about disinformation, massive information operations have been in play about this as well. So since January 8th, and right now it's January 27th now that we're speaking. So as of this past weekend, there's been a bit of increase in connectivity. So some people have managed to find virtual private networks and connect. But from that period, from like January 8th to January like 24th, 25th, where there were no actual windows through the network, what we saw was satellite internet available through Starlink was really
Mm.
the window we had into Iran, right, during this blackout. And so, of course, in 2022, Elon Musk personally took an interest and said, I am lifting the sanctions, and Starlink is now available in Iran. And since 2022, Starlinks have been smuggled inside of Iran. During the summer, June 2025, during the 12-day war between Iran and Israel, this became extremely popular because there was an internet shutdown. The regime again
Mm.
imposed an internet shutdown, and so people were scrambling to buy Starlinks then too, and it was being sold at 1,000 US dollars. Starlinks are typically, I think, 200 to 300 US dollars. So they were being sold at the price of 1,000 US dollars. And right now, the smuggling routes and the smuggling dealers, the black market for Starlink are being sold for about 2,000 US dollars. And so there's a figure that there's about 50,000 Starlink in Iran. I have a feeling it's more. We can't quite like get the exact stats, but there's quite a few Starlink that exists inside of Iran. And this is how we've been getting a lot of the documentation and a lot of the footage. People have been getting it to the people with Starlink connections to get it out.
Mm.
I
Mm.
myself was in touch with people in Iran through Starlink. So it has provided this very crucial window into information. And truly, satellite internet seems to be a game changer for internet
Mm.
shutdowns.
Mm.
And despite like what you might think about the company or, various individuals connected to the company, you have to give it credit where credit is due because
Mm.
has allowed us to have a peek into some of the crimes. Like, if you talk to any of the very credible human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, Harana, Iran Human Rights Documentation Center. Like, there's so many examples of these people doing incredible work to document these crimes, and they have been getting this information through Starlink. And and the regime has tried different things. So during the first weekend, there was evidence that they were using satellite jamming to try to disable the use of Starlink, but it didn't work because, I mean, I had some connections whose Starlink wasn't connecting within the first 48 hours, but by the Sunday, their Starlink was up and running and fine. And
Mm.
so, and from what I understand, Starlink themselves, the company, initiated an update across their software, and they've been putting a lot of resources into ensuring that the satellite connections over Iran work.
From what I understand, it's up to the company to enable the services to function over a specific jurisdiction. And without that, the satellite internet will not work. So, unless Starlink decides that, all right, over Iran, we want the internet connections to work, there's no other way to connect to satellite internet.
Yes, so that's true. So, I mean, I know there's been other places like in Sudan during the
Mm.
civil war. I know I've read and seen a lot of testimonies from Sudanese activists that again, Starlink was very crucial for them, for their
Mm.
communication. And like there's a very great article that I urge you guys to read that a Sudanese activist wrote about, we don't have the privilege of hating Elon Musk because he is
Mm.
our lifeline in the middle of this humanitarian crisis we're living through. So in Sudan, it's also worked. I know, again, it is up to the whim of him, of Elon Musk, but at this moment, whatever your politics or background is, Iranians are grateful that this is his position, that this is working
Mm.
case. And of
Mm.
course, um, And just to like touch on the information operation, so the regime has not been able to fix the Starlink problem. The satellite jamming was overcome.
Mm,
And then they do have very heavy fines for smugglers and those who are purchasing it. So it's a great risk to
mm,
sell these Starlink. So there have been a number of arrests. There's been rumors they've been going to people's homes, detecting the Starlinks on roofs and confiscating them. But there's been a lot of propaganda they've put out. Like a few days ago, state TV IRIB said that, oh, we've disabled 40,000 Starlink. And then you look across all the Starlink users and they're like, no, we're connected. They're just trying to put out this disinformation so people stop buying. So the
mm,
smuggling stop, the demand goes down. So they've been trying to do this to stop people from using it. And it's really interesting because a few days ago, um, the former Secretary General of the Supreme Council for Cyberspace put out a statement that said our ability to conduct internet shutdowns will soon be obsolete because of satellite
mm,
internet. And this is precisely something that I've been working on and some of our colleagues in the digital rights sphere have been working on, which is right now, Starlink, it costs $2,000. There's economic crisis. So the window into Iran we have is through a community of very privileged people.
right.
There's 90 million Iranians, and let's say at most there's 100,000 Starlink if the 50,000 estimate is down. There's 100,000 Starlink in Iran. So that's a window into communities that, can afford such high prices
Mm,
for the
mm,
terminals. So this window is very small and not necessarily representative of everything that's happening. So if there is a way we can scale this, if satellite internet can be scaled and, like you said, not be up to the whim of just one company, it could be a game changer for Iran and for everywhere. And that's why we set up this campaign. It's called directtosell.org. It's a coalition of my organization, Witness, Access Now, Article 19, Strategic Litigation Project, and the Center for Human Rights in Iran. And it's some of the work Access Now has been doing, studying humanitarian crisis in Sudan and Gaza and the need for internet during humanitarian crises. And so this is kind of based on some of the work and findings I have and what Access Now also has been leading with internet and humanitarian crisis of what is the one thing we need to really change the game on access to the internet. And direct to cell is a technology that exists within telephones, smartphones that were built from 2020 onwards that
mm,
gives them the ability to talk to specific direct to cell satellites that are in space. So you cut out the middleman for the need for the receiver,
mm,
and your phone can basically do that to work itself. It's quite complicated and an ambitious project to be able to scale this to 90 million people in Iran, for example, and then eventually scale it to whatever situation that you need it for. But it is a kind of campaign that we have started, and we've been having different conversations with development agencies and policymakers and companies to see if this can be a way forward. Because, like that one policymaker from the Islamic Republic himself said, our ability to do this is going to be obsolete. So we need to help them. We need to help
mm,
them and make access and really revolutionize what accessing internet means, because right now accessing internet is so tied to these very outdated concepts of internet sovereignty that each country needs to control the ability for their own citizens or the people in their borders to access the internet that they can facilitate, that their infrastructure holds. So if we really break this concept and this tradition and make it something global and something humanitarian, it can really revolutionize this ability and for us to be able to understand what's happening in these societies where the regimes want things to be closed and want to be the only voice for the people.
No, absolutely. And I think you've summed it up really well because you've told us about, what's happening in other contexts like Sudan, For example, we've seen prolonged internet shutdowns in India, in Kashmir. We've seen them in Myanmar. We've seen them also happen in Pakistan. And in Ethiopia had a very prolonged internet shutdown. Cameroon in Africa is known to implement these. So I think the learnings from what is happening in Iran are critical, not just for Iran itself, but the broader world where we're experiencing such issues, in order for people to access essential services, because the internet, as we know, enables our ability to not only communicate with friends and family, but access healthcare, emergency response. In Gaza, we've seen how internet shutdown has enabled an entire genocide to be accelerated. And you also spoke about the role of digital rights groups. So thank you for sharing how international solidarity among civil society can really work in times when governments are shutting down the internet. So I think this conversation has been extremely, extremely helpful for us to understand how internet shutdowns work and operate, but also what can we as civil society, as journalists, as everyday citizens can do to push back and to find solutions on how we can connect. So thank you for all the work you do, Mahsa, over the years that you've been doing for Iran, but also global digital rights, for us to understand, but then be also in advising us on how we can move forward to solve these very critical issues. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me and for being able to bring the story of Iran and what Iranians are suffering through to your audience.
No, we really hope the situation can improve as soon as possible. Thank you. Bye-bye. So that was our conversation with Mahsa Alimardani from Witness, an Iranian digital rights expert. We learned from her on how the Iranian government implements its internet shutdown during protests. What is it really that Iranian people are doing to circumvent this shutdown? But she also explained to us what is the technology that is used to implement it. But very importantly, she told us about solutions on how international solidarity can work in order to circumvent forced shutdowns and communication blackouts that have a very huge cost on everyday life, but also on the fundamental rights of citizens across the world. So you can join us for our next episode next Wednesday at 8 p.m. on DawnNews English YouTube and at 11 p.m. on DawnNews on your TV screens. This is Usama Khilji signing out. Thank you.